Alright, wrap up time for Mono Blue Control. So, the good news is we went 3-0 in our matches, and we actually kind of killed it. Like, we won matches, partly because our opponent had some clunky draws, but Merfolk seems like a really hard match, and we won it. Delver seems like a fairly challenging match, and we won it. So, we won some relatively hard matches, and the deck felt pretty good. Once the deck gets ahead, it doesn't win fast, but it's really hard for opponent to come back once we get ahead. While we don't have a ton of true card advantage, apart from confirmed suspicions, we do cycle through our deck pretty well with Condescends, Remands, Cryptics. On the other hand, I definitely get the feeling that if we get behind, we can't get back from behind very easily, which is definitely true looking at the list. Once we get behind, we don't really have a whole lot of options. I guess our best play is clearly Vidalcan Shackles, which is very good if we draw early enough, but we don't have much else. Cryptic Command can theoretically bounce something back to our opponent's hand that we can counter on the way back down, but we don't have a lot of ways to get back when we're behind. The other thing that scares me is there are some really bad matchups. Matchups that I don't think we can win in a million years. Like, we didn't run into Burn, but I have a hard time imagining this deck ever beating Burn. We didn't run into Cavern of Souls, but I have a really hard time imagining our deck beating Cavern of Souls. We beat Merfolk, but their draws were kind of bad. I would assume that a lot of times Merfolk is a really bad draw. Ether Vial decks in general are a bad draw. So there are some cards in decks that just really will give this deck a hard time. So my overall question with this deck is, why are we mono blue? I mean, we're in Modern, a land of insane mana. We want a lot of islands to power up Shackles, which is very true, and I get that. But we could easily play 8 white sources and not hardly cut our island count at all. We could play 4 Flooded Strands, 4 Prairie Streams, and 4 Hallowed Fountains, for example. We lose a total of 4 islands, and we have 12 white sources in our deck, which means we could play cards that would actually help us when we're behind. When we're behind, we could have Wraths, for example, to clear away the board. We could have actual removal like Path to Exile to get rid of a creature and not just be depending on the fairly expensive Vidalcan Shackles. We could also play all the great white sideboard cards, Disenchant Infect, Stony Silences, Timely Reinforcements, maybe Core Firewalkers. We have a lot more options for fighting our bad matchups with white. So I think this deck was really successful. If I was going to keep playing something like this moving forward, I would keep a lot of the counters. I like the overloaded counterspell feeling, but I would look to cut the Warmonger's Chariot, which wasn't very impressive. Possibly cut some of the counters. We might not need the full 4 Stubborn Denial, for example. Maybe trim some things, go down to 3 Vidalcan Shackles in the main deck, and look to fill those slots with some white removal, some Supreme Verdict or Wrath of God type effects, and then free yourselves up to play really powerful white sideboard cards. So that's my impression of the deck. Really powerful when you get ahead, performed better than I expected in some tough matchups, but still pretty rough once we get behind, because we just have very few cards that matter once we're behind. And I think the solution to that is most likely splashing white as a second color, and I think the deck can easily support splashing white. It takes away from the coolness factor of saying, oh, I'm playing mono blue control. Adds a little bit to the budget for the dual lands, but it's probably the more competitive build of this deck, would include some amount of Wraths and Pass to Exiles and sideboard cards. Anyway, that has been our Mono Blue Control against the odds. Make sure to vote on the instant deck text all week this week to pick your favorite for next week's videos. Thank you very much for watching. I had a blast playing this deck. I'm glad you voted for it. This is the deck I wanted to play. If I had a vote, this is the one I would have voted for this past week. Anyway, thanks again. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will talk to you soon.